The judge lifted the blue ribbon into the bright August light, and my cousin Danielle walked to the front of the tent to take it as if she had earned it. "First place in the pieced quilt division," the announcer said, and there was polite applause under the canvas. And the smell of fried dough and cut grass drifted in from the fairway. I was standing near the back, wedged between a folding table and a rack of jars of honey, and I felt my whole face go cold because I had made that quilt. Every square, every seam, every knot of it had passed through my own two hands over the winter, at my kitchen table, under a lamp, while the snow ticked against the glass. And now Danielle was holding my winter up over her head and smiling for a photograph. Let me tell you the small mystery that sat inside my chest that day, the thing I could not say out loud yet. It was this. On the back of that quilt, hidden along the binding where no casual eye would ever look, there was a stitch. Not a decoration, not a signature you could read. A tiny, particular way of turning the thread that my grandmother had taught me. When I was 9 years old, a stitch she had learned from her own mother, and that she made me promise to keep on every quilt I ever finished for the rest of my life. Danielle did not know that stitch existed. She did not know how to make it. And I stood there in the honey-smelling tent, humiliated in front of half my family. And I thought, one day, someone is going to turn that quilt over. My name is Marion. I am 36 years old, and I have been sewing since before I could ride a bike. In my family, I am what they call the quiet one, which is a polite way of saying the one nobody quite notices until they need a hem taken up or a button sewn back on. My mother is loud and charming. My Aunt Carol, Danielle's mother, is louder and more charming. Danielle inherited all of that. The easy laugh, the way of walking into a room like the room had been waiting for her. And I inherited my grandmother's hands, which is not a thing anybody at a family barbecue ever thought was worth very much. I want you to understand my grandmother before I tell you the rest, because she is the center of this whole story, even though she has been gone for 4 years now. Her name was Eleanor, and she lived in a small yellow house at the edge of town with a screened porch that smelled of lavender and dust. When I was a girl, my mother would drop me there for whole summer weeks, mostly to get me out of the way. And my grandmother would sit me down at her big walnut table and teach me. She taught me to press a seam so it lay flat as water. She taught me the names of the patterns, the log cabin and the flying geese and the wedding ring, and she taught me the stitch. The stitch was our secret, and I did not understand at 9 how serious she was about it. She held my small fingers over the needle, and she said, "Marion, a maker always signs her work. But a wise maker signs it where only she will know." She showed me how to hide 3 tiny anchoring turns of thread inside the fold of the binding, at the corner, in a shape that looked like a little wheat sheaf, if you knew to look for it. "This is ours," she said. "My mother's mother made it in Ireland before she ever crossed the water. You put it on everything, and you never tell a soul. And one day, it will tell the truth for you when your own mouth cannot." I remember I laughed, because I could not imagine ever needing a stitch to tell the truth. I was 9. I thought the world was honest. I put that stitch on everything. For 27 years, I put it on baby blankets and Christmas gifts and the quilts I made for the fair, and the pieces I sold at the little craft market on Saturdays for grocery money. It became so automatic that my fingers did it without my mind. And every one of those quilts, dozens and dozens of them scattered across the county in the hope chests and guest rooms of people I barely knew. carried the little hidden wheat sheaf in the corner of the binding. My grandmother's mother's mother's mark, passed down through hands, hidden where only we would know. I never told anyone. Not my husband, not my mother, certainly not Danielle. The quilt in question, the one Danielle held over her head that August day, I had started the previous November. It was a double wedding ring pattern in deep blues and soft creams, the hardest pattern I have ever attempted. All those interlocking curves that fight you the entire way. I worked on it for 4 months. I pricked my fingers so many times that my husband Paul started leaving little boxes of bandages around the house as a joke. I stayed up past midnight on the cold nights, and I got up early. On the gray mornings, and slowly, curve by curve, the rings came together. When I bound the edge in April, I did the hidden stitch in the corner the way I always did. 3 little turns, the wheat sheaf. My grandmother's voice in my head saying, "This is ours." It was the best thing I had ever made. I knew it, the way you know a thing in your bones. Here is how Danielle got her hands on it. In late June, she came by my house, all warmth and compliments, the way she is when she wants something. She oohed and awed over the quilt draped across my sofa, and she said, "Marian, this is stunning. You are so talented." Honestly, it should be in a magazine. I am not proud of how much that landed. When you spend your whole life being the quiet one, a little praise from the charming one can turn your head. "Can I borrow it just for a few days?" she said. "I want to photograph it properly. I have a friend with a real camera. I think you should be selling these online. You could make real money." She made it sound like a gift she was giving me. I said yes. Of course I said yes. She was family. I wrapped it in a cotton sheet, and I handed it to her at the door. And I watched her drive away with 4 months of my winter folded on her passenger seat. Weeks went by, and she did not bring it back. I called once, and she said the photographer was busy, and I felt awkward pushing, so I let it go. That is a thing about being the quiet one. You are trained your whole life not to push, not to make a fuss, not to be difficult. It is a very convenient way for other people to raise you, and it is a terrible way to protect yourself. I told myself she would return it after the fair, and it was only when my mother mentioned, offhand, over the phone, that Danielle had entered a beautiful quilt in the county fair that the cold feeling first touched the back of my neck. I drove to the fairgrounds 2 days before the judging, on a Thursday, just to look. The exhibition tent was half set up. The quilts hung on their tall wooden racks in rows, and there, third from the end, was my double wedding ring. My blues, my creams, 4 months of my life hanging on a stranger's rack with a little white card pinned beside it. I walked up to the card with my heart going hard, and I read it. And the name on the maker line was Danielle Reyes. Not Marian. Danielle. I stood there in the empty tent with the canvas snapping in the wind, and I read that card 3 times, as if the letters might rearrange themselves into the truth. I found a fair volunteer, a tired woman with a clipboard and a lanyard, and I tried to keep my voice level. "There's a mistake on this entry," I said. "I made this quilt. The maker's name is wrong." She looked at me the way people look at you when they have decided in advance that you are a nuisance. "The entry form is signed by the exhibitor," she said. "If there's a dispute, that's between the 2 of you, honey. I can't change a card." And that word, honey, the same word the ribbon, Judge would use later, landed on me like a small, flat hand. I left the tent shaking, and I sat in my car in the gravel lot for a long time before I could drive. That night, I called Danielle. She did not even pretend to be surprised. "Oh, Marian, don't be like this," she said, and I could hear a television going in her house behind her voice. "You gave it to me to photograph." And honestly, I did a lot of work on it. I fixed some of the binding, I steamed it, I built the whole display concept. It's a collaboration. A collaboration. 4 months of my hands, and she called it a collaboration because she had run an iron over it. "You put your name on the form," I said, and my voice cracked, which I hated. "Marian," she said, patient and gentle, as if I were a child, "you never do anything with your talent. You just let these beautiful things sit in your house. I'm actually helping you. If it wins, everyone will see it, and that's good for both of us." Then she said she had to go, and she hung up. And I sat in my dark kitchen, holding a phone that was no longer connected to anyone. I made the mistake of telling the family. I thought, surely they will see it. Surely my own mother will stand up for me. I was wrong in a way that still aches. My mother sighed her long, suffering sigh and said, "Marian, is this really worth a family fight?" You did lend it to her. My Aunt Carol, Danielle's mother, was worse. "You've always been jealous of Danielle," she said, in the flat, certain voice of a woman who has never once doubted her own daughter. Ever since you were girls. It's sad, honestly, at your age. My uncle told me to let it go. My cousin's husband told me it was just a quilt. Just a quilt. 27 years of my grandmother's teaching folded into just a quilt by a man who had never sewn a stitch in his life. I got off that group phone call and I understood, fully and coldly, for the first time, that no one was coming to help me. If the truth was going to be told, I would have to find a way to make it tell itself. For a few days, I did nothing but grieve, honestly. I moved around my house like a ghost. Paul, my husband, kept quiet and made me tea and did not tell me to let it go, which is one of the reasons I married him. On the third night, he sat down across from me at the kitchen table, the same table where I do all my sewing, and he said, "Marian, you made that quilt. I watched you make it. I watched you cry over those curves in February. What do you actually want to happen?" And I realized I did not want Danielle destroyed. I did not want my aunt humiliated in the street. I only wanted the truth to stand up, once, in a room, where everyone could see it. That was all. I wanted my own name back. I need to tell you about the fabric itself, because it matters to how the quilt came to be. Those blues did not come from a store. They came from my grandmother's own stash, the deep bolt of indigo cotton she had kept wrapped in tissue in her cedar chest for 30 years. Saved for something special she never got around to making. When she died and the loud ones took the furniture, I quietly took the fabric. Because to me, a folded length of good cotton was worth more than any lamp. I had cut those blue rings from her cloth. So when Danielle held that quilt over her head at the fair, she was not only holding my 4 months of work. She was holding my grandmother's saved indigo, cut by my hands, and calling it her own. That was the part that kept me awake. More than the ribbon, more than the money, it felt like she had reached into a grave. Paul and I talked late into that third night, and something in me changed as the hours passed. I stopped feeling like a victim and started feeling like a maker again, which is a very different way to sit in a chair. A maker measures twice. A maker is patient. A maker knows that the strength of a thing is in the parts that do not show the seams and the batting And the honest backing, nobody praises. If I was going to answer Danielle, I would answer her the way I sewed, slowly and exactly, from the inside out, with no loose threads. I would not fight her in the loud rooms where she always won. I would build my answer quietly, piece by piece, and only reveal it when it was whole. That was when I remembered the notebook. My grandmother kept a quilting notebook for 60 years, a fat, cracked thing bound in brown leather, full of patterns and thread counts and little notes in her slanted hand. When she died, most of her things were divided up in the usual family. The loud ones taking the valuable pieces, and nobody wanted the old notebook. So it came to me almost by accident, in a box of scraps. I had never read it all the way through. I climbed up to the attic that night, and I found the box under the eaves. And I sat on the dusty floor with a flashlight, and I turned the pages, and my grandmother spoke to me again in her looping ink. Most of it was ordinary, thread weights and yardage. But near the back, on a page soft with handling, I found what I did not know I was looking for. She had drawn the stitch. Our stitch. The little wheat sheaf of 3 anchoring turns, drawn large and careful, with an arrow pointing to the corner of a binding, and beneath it, in her hand, these words: "The maker's mark, hidden in the corner where only we look." My mother taught me. Her mother taught her. Back to Kilkenny. Marion has it now. If ever there is a question of whose hands made a thing, turn it over and look in the corner. The stitch does not lie. I sat on the attic floor and I cried. But it was a different kind of crying than I had done all week. Because my grandmother, 40 years before this whole mess, had written down exactly what to do. She had left me a witness in ink. But a notebook alone was not enough, and I knew it. Danielle would say I had drawn it myself, or that anyone could copy a stitch. I needed more than the notebook. I needed the stitch to appear where it could not be faked, on many quilts, over many years, in a pattern of my hands that stretched back long before Danielle ever thought of stealing anything. And that is when the real size of the betrayal opened up in front of me, because I started looking. And what I found was so much worse than one stolen quilt at one small fair. I began to search online, the way you do at 2 in the morning when you cannot sleep. I typed in the name of the little craft market where I sold my quilts on Saturdays, and Danielle's name on a hunch, and I found her shop. She had an online store. She had had it for almost a year, and it was full of my quilts. Photographs of my double wedding ring, my log cabins, the star quilt I had made for the church raffle 2 summers ago and assumed was in some stranger's home. All of them photographed in good light, priced at $300 and $400. Described in warm little paragraphs as handmade by me with love. Some were marked sold. She had been selling pictures of my work, taking orders, and I realized with a lurch, delivering my actual quilts. The ones she had borrowed to photograph, one by one over the past year. Each time with the same warm compliments at my door. I sat there in the blue light of the screen, and I counted. 11 quilts. 11 pieces of my life, sold under her name, for money that had gone into her account, while the family called me the jealous one. The fair quilt was not a single bad decision. It was the tip of something she had been doing patiently for a year. Hidden in plain sight, using the exact same tools she always used on me. The borrowed compliment, the "let me help you," the charm that made me feel unkind for asking questions. My hands were cold on the keyboard, and then a strange calm came over me, because I understood something. Every single one of those 11 quilts had my grandmother's stitch hidden in its corner. Every one. Danielle had photographed the fronts. She had never once thought to look at the backs. She had been selling signed confessions, and she did not even know it. I did not sleep at all that night. By morning, I had a plan, and it was a patient one. Because patience is the one thing my whole life had trained into me, and the one thing Danielle never had. I did not want to fight her in the family group chat, where charm always beats truth. I wanted a room, a neutral room, with witnesses who did not owe her anything. And the fair, the very fair where she had entered my quilt, was about to give me exactly that. Because the county fair does not just award the ribbon on Judging Day. 3 days later, there is a public showcase, the Best of Fair evening, where the blue ribbon pieces are displayed on a stage and the head judge talks about each one to a crowd, and the newspaper comes, and the whole town wanders through. Danielle had entered my quilt into the one event that would put it and her in front of an audience. I made 2 phone calls. The first was to the fair office, where I asked, very calmly, who the head quilting judge was that year. The woman told me it was Mrs. Auberly, who had judged the quilts for as long as anyone could remember. The name went through me like a small electric shock, because I knew that name. Vera Auberly had been my grandmother's friend. They had belonged to the same quilting circle for 30 years, a group of women who met on Wednesdays in the church basement with their thermoses of coffee. Mrs. Auberly had been at my grandmother's funeral. She had held my hand at the graveside and told me my grandmother's stitches were the finest in the county. My grandmother, 4 years gone, had put a witness in that judge's chair without either of us knowing it. The second call was harder. I called Mrs. Auberly directly. Her number was still in my grandmother's old address book, another thing nobody had wanted. She remembered me at once. Eleanor's granddaughter, she said warmly. The one with the good hands. I told her the whole story, plainly, without dressing it up. Because she was not a woman you could charm, and I did not want to try. I told her about the borrowed quilt, the entry form, the online shop, and the 11 pieces. And then, because I trusted her, I told her the one thing I had never told anyone. I told her about the stitch. I heard her go very still on the other end of the line. "The wheat sheaf," she said quietly, "in the corner of the binding. Eleanor showed me once, years ago, and made me swear never to tell. She said only her line had it. I have it," I said. "It's on every quilt I've ever made. It's on the one hanging in your tent right now with the wrong name. On it." There was a long silence, and then Mrs. Auberly said, in a voice that had gone from warm to something firmer, "Marian, I judge on merit and merit alone, and I will not put my thumb on any scale. But I will tell you this. At the showcase, I always ask the maker to speak about her work. I always ask how a piece was made. And a real maker can always answer. You come to that showcase, dear. You just come and stand where I can see you." There was one more. A clue I haven't told you about, a small one, that clicked into place the day before the showcase. I was going back through Danielle's online shop pages, printing them carefully, when I noticed something in the photographs themselves. In every single picture, she had folded the quilts front side up, draped over a chair or a fence, styled and pretty. But in one photo, she had gotten sloppy, and a corner of the binding had flipped over in the wind. And there, tiny but unmistakable in the high-resolution image, was the wheat sheaf. My grandmother's stitch, photographed by Danielle herself, posted publicly on her own shop, months ago, as evidence she did not know she was giving. She had literally published my grandmother's mark under her own name and never seen it. I printed that page twice. It was the moment I stopped being afraid. I practiced what I would say. Not a speech, because speeches sound rehearsed, and the truth should not. I practiced staying calm. I practiced the plain sentences. I stood at my kitchen sink, and I said them to the window. I made every stitch of it until my voice stopped shaking on the word every. Paul listened from the doorway and told me I did not need to perform. I only needed to turn the corner over and let the stitch talk. He was right. The whole point of my grandmother's mark was that it did the speaking, so I did not have to. All I had to do was be in the room and be honest, and let the hidden work rise into the light on its own. The 3 days before the showcase were the longest of my life. Danielle, of course, was triumphant. She posted the ribbon photo everywhere. The family congratulated her in a flood of messages, and my Aunt Carol wrote, "So proud of my talented girl," and my own mother added a row of little clapping hands, and not one of them thought of me at all. I did not respond. I did not argue in the chat. I only prepared. I printed the pages from Danielle's online shop, all 11 quilts, with the dates and the prices and her warm, lying descriptions. I photographed the hidden stitch on 3 old quilts I still had in my own house, in close detail, next to a ruler. And I brought my grandmother's notebook, the brown leather cracked with 60 years, with the page marked where she had drawn the wheat sheaf in her own hand and written that the stitch does not lie. I put it all in a canvas bag, and on the Saturday evening of the showcase, I put on my grandmother's blue linen shirt. And Paul drove me to the fairgrounds without a word, just his hand over mine at the stop signs. The showcase tent was crowded and warm. String lights hung from the canvas poles, and folding chairs were set in rows. And up on the low stage, the blue ribbon quilts hung on tall racks. My double wedding ring was in the center, lit gold under the lights. So beautiful it made my throat hurt. Danielle sat in the front row in a bright dress, glowing, her mother beside her, my mother 2 seats over. I came in quietly and stood at the side near the aisle, where Mrs. Auberly, up on the stage in her sensible cardigan, could see me. She caught my eye once and gave the smallest nod, and then she began. She went down the row of quilts one by one, and for each she called the maker up to say a few words. A woman spoke about her applique. A man spoke about the star pattern he had pieced for his late wife. The crowd clapped, warm and easy. And then Mrs. Auberly came to the center rack, to my quilt, and she said, "Our first place piece this year. A double wedding ring in blues and creams. Beautiful, difficult work. Would the maker come and tell us about it?" And Danielle stood up, smoothing her dress, and walked to the stage, into the gold light. And the crowd applauded, and I felt the whole tent tilt. Mrs. Auberly smiled at her, kind as anything, and asked an ordinary opening question. "Tell us, what drew you to the double wedding ring pattern?" And Danielle, who is never at a loss for words, said something warm and vague about loving the romance of it and wanting a challenge, and the crowd nodded. Then Mrs. Auberly asked, still gentle, "And how did you handle the curves?" The double wedding ring is famous for those interlocking arcs. So many quilters struggle with the piecing there. What was your method? And I watched Danielle's smile stay in place while her eyes went just slightly blank. Because she had never pieced a curve in her life. And she said something about being very careful and patient, which is what you say when you do not know. A small murmur went through the older women in the crowd, the ones who quilt, because they knew that answer meant nothing. Mrs. Auberly's voice did not change, but something behind it settled into place. "Let me ask you one more thing," she said, "and then we'll thank you." On a piece like this, a maker often finishes the binding a particular way. A signature, sometimes hidden. Every serious quilter has her habits. Can you show us how you finished the binding on this quilt? Just turn back the corner and show us your hand. And the tent went quiet. Danielle looked at the quilt. She looked at Mrs. Auberly. She reached out and touched the corner of the binding, and she turned it over. And she looked down at the underside, where the little wheat sheaf of 3 anchoring turns sat hidden in the fold. And she did not know what she was looking at. She had no idea it was there. Her face in the gold light in front of the whole town simply did not know. She said. I finished it the normal way. And she could not say more because there was no more she could say. That was when I stepped forward. I did not shout. I did not run up the aisle. I only said, from where I stood, clearly enough for the tent to hear, "There's a hidden stitch in that corner." 3 turns, in the shape of a wheat sheaf. My grandmother taught it to me when I was 9. It's on every quilt I've ever made. The crowd turned. Danielle's mouth opened. Mrs. Auberly, very calm, said, "Come up, dear. You seem to know this piece." And I walked up onto that stage, past Danielle, past the front row where my mother sat with her clapping hands gone still. And I stood beside my own quilt for the first time in front of anyone. I did not gloat. I want you to know that. I set my canvas bag on the judging table, and I opened my grandmother's own notebook to the marked page, and I laid it flat. And I said, "This is my grandmother Eleanor's notebook. She judged in this circle with Mrs. Auberly for 30 years. This is her drawing of the stitch, in her own hand, from 40 years ago. She wrote here that it goes in the corner of the binding, where only our family looks. And she wrote, 'If there is ever a question of whose hands made a thing, turn it over and look in the corner.' I turned the notebook so the front row could see the old ink. 'The stitch,' I said, 'does not lie.' Then I turned the corner of my quilt fully back into the light, and Mrs. Auberly leaned in with her reading glasses, and she looked at the little wheat sheaf, and she looked at the drawing in the notebook, and she straightened up, and she said to the whole tent in the plain, the voice of a woman who had judged fairly her entire life, 'This is Eleanor's stitch. I have seen it once before, 20 years ago, when Eleanor showed me in confidence. It is on this quilt. And it is not something you can copy from a photograph, because you cannot see it in a photograph. Only the hands that made this piece could have put it here.' She looked at Danielle, not unkindly, and then she looked at me. 'Whose hands made this quilt?' she asked, though she already knew. 'Mine,' I said. 'I made every stitch of it, over 4 months, at my kitchen table. And I made the 10 others my cousin has been selling online under her own name, too. Every one of them has the same mark in the corner. You can check them all.' I took out the printed pages then, the 11 quilts from Danielle's shop, and I laid them on the table beside the notebook, and I did not say another word about them. I did not have to. The town could read. A year of my quilts, sold under her name, handmade by me with love, at $300 and $400 each. Danielle stood in the gold light with nowhere to put her hands, Her mother had gone gray in the front row. My mother was looking at the floor. And the strange thing, the thing I did not expect, was that I felt no triumph at all. I only felt tired and clean, the way you feel after you have finally set down something heavy you have been carrying for a very long way. Mrs. Auberly did the correcting quietly and completely, the way justice should be done. She unpinned the little white card with Danielle's name from the display, and she wrote a new one in her own careful hand that said, Marion Ellis, Maker. She lifted the blue ribbon from where it hung, and she walked over and she pinned it to my grandmother's blue shirt, right over my heart. And she held my shoulders for a second and said, low, just for me, she'd be proud of your hands. And prouder of the way you did this. The tent, which had been so quiet, began to clap, and it grew. The older quilters first, and then everyone. A real warm sound. And I stood there in my grandmother's shirt with the ribbon over my heart and let it wash over me. Because I had earned it, curve by curve on the cold nights, and everybody in that town now knew it. Danielle did not scream or storm out. That is not how it went. She just got smaller. She said in a thin voice, I was only trying to help her. She never does anything with her talent, and even her own mother did not defend her this time. Because 11 printed pages were sitting on the table in front of the whole town. She left through the side of the tent with her bright dress and her mother trailing after, and I did not chase her. And I did not post anything about it later, and I did not tell the story in the family chat to make her look bad. The truth had already stood up in the room. It did not need me to keep beating it like a drum. There were consequences, but they were the quiet, natural kind, not revenge I had to manufacture. The fair asked Danielle to close her online shop, and she did, because the alternative was the fair reporting the sales. The people who had bought my quilts under her name found out whose hands had really made them, and several of them wrote to me, kind letters. And one woman drove out to my house just to shake my hand and ask me to make her a piece properly, with my own name on it. Word went around the county the way word does. Within a month, I had more orders than I could fill, real orders, at fair prices, from people who wanted a quilt made by Marion Ellis. And I opened my own little shop at last, the thing Danielle had always told me I would never do. And I did it under my own name, with my grandmother's stitch in every corner. My Aunt Carol did not speak to me for a while, which I could live with. But my mother, some weeks later, came to my kitchen, the room where I do my sewing, and sat down at the table and watched my hands work the way she never had when I was a girl. I didn't stand up for you, she said finally, looking at the quilt taking shape under my fingers. I saw the easy thing and I took it, and I let them call you jealous, and you weren't. You were right. It was not a grand apology. But she said it, and she meant it, and she stayed the whole afternoon and watched me sew. And when she left, she touched the corner of the binding where the little wheat sheaf hides, and she said, Show me. Show me how she taught you. So I did. I taught my own mother the stitch at 36 at that table, and something old and bent in our family straightened a little. I still think about the moment Danielle turned that corner over and did not know what she was looking at. She had my whole quilt in her hands, my 4 months, my blues, and my creams, and she never once thought to look at the back. Because she was only ever interested in the side that faced the world, the side you could photograph and praise and sell. That was her whole life in one gesture. And my grandmother, who spent her whole life on the side nobody looks at, on the honest, hidden work in the corner, had left a mark there that no charm and no photograph and no borrowed compliment could ever fake. The showy side can be stolen. The hidden side cannot. So here is what I want to leave you with tonight, wherever you are listening from. If you are one of the quiet ones, the ones whose work gets borrowed and whose credit gets taken, the ones told you are too sensitive when you ask for your name back, I want you to hear this. Do your honest work and sign it where only you will know. Put your true mark in the corner, in the part no one bothers to look at, and keep it there faithfully for years, even when it feels like it will never matter. Because one day, someone will turn the whole thing over into the light, and in that moment, the truth will not need you to shout. It will already be there, small and patient and impossible to fake, telling everyone whose hands really made the thing. The stitch does not lie. It never did. Good night, and thank you for sitting with me, and with my grandmother, and with her wheat sheaf hidden in the corner, all the way to the end.